Hi everybody. I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you tonight. And I want to thank John Grigsby and everyone who's worked so hard on the Northern Virginia Tea Party for organizing this event. I think in the wake of the election, it's very important for us to consider the topic tonight. What do we do now? And there's that iconic scene at the end of The Candidate where Robert Redford has just been elected and he says, "So what do we do now?" But I think that is at least as important a question for us to consider as for those we have just elected or re-elected. Now, I hate to rain on everybody's parade, but when I see that the new House leadership is going to be bailout brothers John Boehner and Eric Cantor, the new Republican Congress is looking a lot like deja vu all over again to me, to quote the great philosopher Yogi Berra. Now you remember John Boehner is the guy who said, "The bailout is a crap sandwich, and I'm going to vote for it." And of course Eric Cantor, after the TARP failed on the first vote in the House, went on TV and said that if Republicans had held the majority, it would have passed. So now that the Republicans hold the majority again, we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to make sure that this Congress is different from the last Republican Congress, the Republican House? And I think that there are some lessons we can find from what's worked in the past. I want to talk a little bit tonight about one of my favorite stories from history, the legend of Davy Crockett and Horatio Bunce. I know a few of you may have heard me tell this story before, and I hope that many of you have read it, but I think we can get some lessons from it. The story really begins when Davy Crockett, who's a congressman representing a district in Tennessee, is standing on the steps of the Capitol one night with some other members of Congress, and they see that there's a large fire coming from Georgetown. So they did exactly what you would expect congressmen today to do. They rushed over to Georgetown to help put it out. And unfortunately, they weren't really able to do much good. The fire was massive, a lot of homes were destroyed, and so of course a lot of families were left homeless. And the next day, a measure was rushed through the House to appropriate $20,000 in welfare for the victims of this fire. And Davy Crockett supported the bill. A little while later, he was out campaigning in his district in Tennessee, and he runs into a man who's out plowing his farm, a guy named Horatio Bunce. And Davy Crockett begins to introduce himself, and Mr. Bunce says, "Oh, I know who you are. You are Colonel Crockett, and I suppose you're out campaigning. And I've supported you in the past, but I'm not going to support you again." And Davy Crockett says, "Well, why not? What's the trouble?" And Horatio Bunce says, "You voted for an unconstitutional measure recently." He says, "This vote shows that either you have not the capacity to understand the Constitution, or that you are wanting in honesty and firmness to be guided by it. In either case, you are not the man to represent me." Davy Crockett says, "Well, there's got to be some mistake. I don't remember any constitutional question." And Horatio Bunce tells him, "Well, I read the newspapers, and the newspapers say that you voted for $20,000 for some victims of a fire. Is that not true?" Davy Crockett says, "Well, yeah, it is true, and it's the last vote I would think anybody would criticize me for." And Horatio Bunce asks him, "Well, where in the Constitution do you find the authority for Congress to give away the public money in charity?" And Davy Crockett doesn't know what to say. And he later is telling the story and says, "And when I thought of it, I couldn't remember anything in the Constitution that gave that authority." So he tried a different tack. He says, "Well, it was only $20,000. Horatio Bunce says, "It's not the amount that I object to. It's the principle." And then goes on to explain that if Congress has the money to give, the authority to give away any money in charity, then there's no limit to how much it may give away. And he explains the dangers of exploding government corruption and the problems that would ensue from this. Clearly the guy was pretty prophetic because we're living out all the things that he warned of. Well, in the end, he's made a compelling case, and Davy Crockett is convinced. And he tells him, "Well, my friend, you hit the nail upon the head when you said I had not sense enough to understand the Constitution. I intended to be guided by it, and thought I had studied it in full. I have heard many speeches in Congress about the powers of Congress, but what you have said there at your plow has got more hard sound sense in it than all the fine speeches I ever heard. If I had ever taken the view of it that you have, I would have put my head into the fire before I would have given that vote. And if you will forgive me and vote for me again, if I ever vote for another unconstitutional law, I wish I may be shot." Well, Horatio Bunce is favorably impressed. And he says, "Okay, I will trust you one more time, but you have to go around and tell everybody that you've realized your error." And anyway, they end up having a big barbecue. 1,000 men come. Davy Crockett explains how he's made this mistake. He's been convinced by Horatio Bunce that it was a mistake, and if they support him again, he won't do it again. So, of course, they support him. He's reelected. And the next time a similar unconstitutional bill comes up, Davy Crockett votes against it and actually uses this story to explain why. Now, I think there are some really important things, some lessons that we can draw out from this legend. First of all, even somebody who's sincere, and I do think that Davy Crockett was sincere, he seems that way from the story, can be misguided once they get to Congress, once they face the pressures and all the fine speeches about the powers of Congress. Even somebody who's sincere about intending to be guided by the Constitution can easily be led astray. And that's where we come in. That's where we have to hold their heads to the fire, as Davy Crockett suggests. So how do we do that? Well, there are a lot of things that we can do. First of all, self-education never ends. It's so important to continually read and refresh ourselves on the principles of constitutional government, market economics, political philosophy, that it never ever stops, the need to read, to talk with other people, to refine your ideas. So please, read books. I know a great book you can read. Talk to your friends about them. Think about what you're learning. Tell others about it. That's the most important thing you can do. Second of all, stay informed. You notice Horatio Bunce tells Davy Crockett, "I read the newspapers. I know what you're up to." Now, you may or may not have a reliable newspaper in your local area, but find some reliable source of information where you can keep tabs on what your congressmen are voting for and what things are coming up in Congress, what's going on, what the new policy initiatives are, so that you can exert pressure. Okay, third, hold them accountable. Confront them. Confront them by contacting their offices, confront them at their town hall meetings, confront them when you see them in the grocery store. If they vote for something that's unconstitutional, if they give floor speeches or campaign speeches touting unconstitutional measures, confront them about it. And don't let them get away with it just the way that Horatio Bunce didn't let Davy Crockett get away with it. Explain to them the constitutional principles that are at stake here. Because just like Davy Crockett, a lot of them just don't get it. Okay. And finally, make good on what Horatio Bunce said. If you are wanting in the understanding of the Constitution or the integrity to be guided by it, you are not the man to represent me. And so make sure that your members of Congress know that if they support unconstitutional legislation, if they support things that are bad for prosperity, in other words, things that are bad for the free market, that they will not have your support again. fulfill the wish of Davy Crockett and hold their heads to the fire. Thanks again for listening to me. I want to thank John Grigsby again for inviting me and everybody who's worked so hard on this. I do hope that I'll be able to visit with you again sometime soon. But until then, the work goes on, because it's not over till it's over.